Well, welcome everybody to this Convoy guest session. I think I'm going to shut up at this point and hand it all over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. So I'm Rachel Shackleton. I am a business trainer specializing in leadership, communication skills, customer excellence, and well-being in the workplace. I'm also a qualified medical herbalist, naturopath, and kinesiologist, working with individuals on rebalancing health. So today's session is where is the you in the list of your priorities? That is the title of the session. And this is really all about what happens in life to most of us in the Western world, is that we forget ourselves in amongst all the busyness that goes on in our day-to-day lives. So I'm going to talk about that in relation to your health and well-being. It makes a huge difference, actually. I learned the hard way. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience, that if you don't put yourself first, you cannot show up for all the things that you want to accomplish in your life and all those people in your life who are important to you, whether they're family, partners, colleagues, bosses, animals, all these groups that we all have. And that's really, for me, is that you've got to put yourself somewhere and the top priority. So before I start to share the screen, I'm just going to explain a little bit about the format of our session. So it's going to be interactive. So I'm not going to be talking at you on this screen for the next hour and a half. You will be getting involved in some exercises, some polls, and I hope also through your own questions. So please feel free to ask your questions at any time so that we have interaction, we have discussion, and I do hope we also have some fun as well. I do have some slides. I'm not going to do death by PowerPoint, but it just helps to make the experience a bit easier being online. When there's no flip chart, you can't just sort of draw things at the last minute. So it just helps you to follow on what I'm talking about. So let me share the screen. And hopefully, can everybody see that? Let me define myself as well.
Gotcha.
Right, brilliant. So as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago in the introduction, what I'm talking about today is where is the you in your list of priorities? Yeah, that would be good if the slides had changed. So what we're looking to accomplish in this hour and a half is the following outcomes. So to be able to recognize the importance of putting yourself first. And to a certain degree, I touched on that, but I'm going to go into that in much more detail as we go through the session. To look at the impact of emotion on the physical and mental body. Now, bearing in mind in an hour and a half, we can't go in great detail on this, but it is the emotional aspect of our lives that actually affects our health more than any other aspect, such as diet, for example, lack of downtime, etc. To look at the circle of influence that you have, that we all have. We all have a certain set of parameters where we can influence things and control things. And we also have parameters where we have absolutely no influence and no control. But yet very often we find ourselves worried about those areas that we have no control over, which means it's a drain on our energy system. We're going to look at the Kubler-Ross change curve. This is it's probably the best used model for change in any leadership or change management program. It's very simple, and I'll introduce it a little bit further on so that you can understand what happens to you when you're faced with big change. And bear in mind that big change for one person may not be big change for another. We're all unique, and therefore what's difficult for one may not be difficult for another. And the last point there is to pick up some tips on how to support your positive mental and physical well-being so that you can have joy in your life and you can maximize your performance. And that is not only work-related performance, that is your life, what are the things you want to do with your life, whatever that is, so that you have that energy reserve to be able to do that. Okay, so a couple of words about myself, which has already been said in the introduction, but I want you to note two things. One is that I've used this term, the explorer. Many of you will probably know that one of the most famous explorers was Ernest Shackleton, whose name I carry and who is actually a relative. And the fact that I am a trained hotelier, so that's where I started my career. And with that career, I've managed to travel the world, which has just been the most amazing experience. But it's one that sets you up well to learn from other cultures and to learn to live with the unexpected and particularly change. So let's do our first poll in relation to this question. Where are you on your list of priorities? So Chris, if you can pull that up. Do I need to stop share? Oh no, there we go. Oh, look at that. So if you can take a couple of minutes just to think about that question and answer the poll there, the two different questions. Okay, so thanks, Chris.
Okay. So
it seems that most people set some time aside for some form of activity for self-care once a week. And it seems that sometimes we hit that once a week in terms of putting it as a priority. Does anybody have any comments or questions around that? Everybody happy with that? Okay. So by the end of this session, I hope that will increase in terms of at least setting, even if it's 10 minutes aside each day for yourself, to do some kind of activity of self-care and to actually hit those targets 90% and upwards so that you become a priority in your life. Okay, fabulous. So would you like to, can I take that down, Chris? Oh, yes, I can. Fantastic. All right. So keeping that in mind, let's move on a little. Oops, sorry, not that fast. Let's move on to just a little bit of thought background around this here. So I mentioned in my introduction there that I refer to myself, or not refer to myself, but I am related to Shackleton, Sir Ernest Shackleton, the Antarctic explorer. You may or may not know, he is actually the only one at that time in history who managed to go to the Antarctic and return with all his men, all his team alive. The other expeditions that were more or less at the same time with Scott and a couple of others, they lost men, and in some cases they actually lost all of their men. So the question is, well, what happened and why is this important? So from a historical point of view, there are many things that we can take from this situation. So what actually happened was they set sail, but because the weather was so bad when they got to the Antarctic, it was already freezing. And well, it's always frozen, but it was freezing for the winter much faster. And therefore the ship got stuck. Not only did it get stuck, but it also started to get compacted by this ice. And the ice eventually would have crushed it. So Shackleton decided that he would try to go to the other side of the island and get help from the whaling station. And bear in mind, they had no navigation tools in the early 1800s. He navigated his way with a couple of men all the way and managed to get to the whaling station, come back with a ship and pick up all his men who were still alive, and eventually get them all home. Well, how did he do this? And this is really the question, is how did he do this? There are several books written on this topic about him and his leadership qualities. But one of the things that Shackleton did was he had the ability to not only connect to his head, the logic of what was happening around him, but also to his heart. What needed to happen? What was his intuition telling him about how to work with this extreme situation? What has this, you might be thinking, got to do with me? Well, I went through not a situation like this, but a situation that was very similar in nature in Russia. Back in 1998, Russia suffered from an economic crisis. It was limited to Russia and not affecting other countries. And it was a situation that was so scary, you just couldn't imagine that the economy, the inflation was going so fast that deflation was happening at the same time. So if you had, for example, $50,000 in your bank account as a business, within 24 hours, you had 5,000. It was that fast. And I was looking at this situation, not understanding what to do, how to do, if to do, and almost stuck in a situation where I had 15 employees who were all looking at me to say, well, you're the boss, come up with the answers. And I eventually did come up with the answers, but the question is, how did I do that? And it links back to this idea of Shackleton. You cannot only look at a situation only with your logic. You've also got to connect into yourself, which is why this idea of well-being is so important. And Shackleton put in place certain boundaries, certain regime on a daily basis for his team members. I did exactly the same for mine. I basically put them all on the same salary because I understood that if I put them on the street, they wouldn't get a job. Even though companies all around me, international, multinationals, local companies, were all putting people on the street. They were making them redundant overnight, irrelevant to families or anything else. And I understood that if I did that, my team members would not get another job. So I looked for the way to make this work. And I took a big risk, just like Shackleton, who went over to the other side of the island. I took a risk and I cut everybody's salaries with their agreement to exactly the same rate. And it didn't matter whether you were a cleaner, whether you were a trainer, whether you were an accountant, you all got the same amount of money. And every day we would sit and have lunch together, which was another regime. It was a regime to keep our mood up, to keep our spirits up and to keep my spirits up as the main leader and driver. Okay, so looking at this idea, looking back on this situation, oops, I need to change slide. Looking back on this situation, I understood that this is what I went through. And no doubt this is also what Shackleton went through and many other people go through in terms of this change curve. So the change curve, this lady, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, is no longer alive, but she came up with this change curve from studying terminally ill cancer patients in hospices, in hospitals. And she understood in this study that the doctors and the nurses are not prepared to deal with the emotional side of the patients. Not only the patients, but also the family members. And very often with terminally ill people, they go through this process of finding peace, integration with what they are suffering and the inevitable. But more importantly, the family members or those close to the person go through very often a bigger whirlwind of change, trying to understand why my husband, why my wife, why my father, why my daughter, etc. So this is what she came up with. And as a subsequent of that, there was a lot of training put in place for the doctors and nurses of how to deal with the emotional side. So looking at this change curve, when we are faced with a big situation that requires us to change, it requires us to deal with something we've never been faced with before, or something that comes over as being completely overwhelming. The first thing we do is we go into shock. What is happening here? It can't possibly be happening. And we deny it, which means we look for all the evidence around to support the fact that it's not happening. But actually it is. Like the situation that I had where the money was just disappearing from the bank account overnight. Then you go into this sort of almost downward spiral or downward movement of anger, frustration, annoyance, and that anger can be directed at yourself. Why have I been made redundant? What's wrong with me? And taking that situation out on yourself, thus affecting your physical and mental well-being. That then goes into low mood, lack of energy, lack of motivation, which is why it's so important to put in an infrastructure or put in a process or a regime to keep you going, keep your mood up, keep your self moving forward in a motivated way. And in your cases, probably most of you, to keep looking for that job, even though you keep getting no's. Then we go through the next stage of experimentation. Well, okay, I can't stay in this place. I've got to do something. So let's have a think about this. Let's move some ideas around. Let's talk to other people. What have they done? What are they doing? Why would they do? Will they do? How will they do? And then from that to come out with a decision. What are we going to do? And then start to move in the way of integrating into this change, flowing with the change, because now we have a new step, a new set of steps, a new plan to integrate ourselves into the inevitable. So in that case, in terms of looking at being made redundant, potentially what I mean by that is that you've accepted, okay, I've been made redundant. It was nothing to do with me. that is just the circumstance. I have no control over that. There's no point in being depressed, angry at myself, low mood. What can I do about it? Okay, let me talk to a few people. Let me register myself at job recruitment agents. Let me talk to Chris at Convoy. Great, I've now got a plan. Let's move forward. And every day through your structure, through your routine, you start to put things in place. Does anybody have any questions on this change curve? Okay, what I want you to do now is I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to put you into groups. How many we are? Chris, do you want to be in a group?
I'll have to manage it. So
okay, that's fine. So that means we're 12. Brilliant.
So, 18. We've got 18 people in the session.
Oh,
so.
Yes, I'm looking at the chat box. Okay, so 18, so that means 16. Okay, so 4 groups of 4. I'm going to put you into two breakout rooms. And what I want to do is I want you to actually answer this question, which I should have showed you before. I said that. Oh, come on, that's it. In your groups, for 5-7 minutes, I want you to just discuss and share your thoughts and feelings about being made redundant initially. How did you feel? And try and be as honest as you can with yourself. You've got nothing to be embarrassed about or upset about from a point of view of well, it's all about the feelings. So do the feelings, and now how you feel, having time gone a little bit on. Okay, everybody understand what they're doing? Yeah. All right.
Okay. And how long is the break?
Let's say 7 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll just have a brief discussion. Okay.
Okay. Here we go. Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. So it looked like room 1 had was still going strong there.
Yeah.
All right. So how did you get on? Who would like to share some thoughts about how you felt at the time of being made redundant? What did you find in your groups?
Well, I think for me and also for our group, it was just very shock and disbelief to start off with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just not understanding it, very difficult to process. And that was a very difficult thing to get over. But, you know, there was a lot of praise for Convoy, actually, in our group for, you know, bringing people together and helping people talk through and process.
Mm-hmm.
That whole sort of feeling of loss as well that people had, and
Mm-hmm.
to start to come together and look towards the future more.
Yeah, the phraseology, that feeling of loss is huge. The impact is huge on us mentally and physically. Sounded like you had a good discussion in your group there, Julian.
Yes, yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Would another group...
How about someone from group 2?
I don't know what group I was in, actually. What group?
Alex, you were in group 1.
Oh, was I?
Oh, no, you were group 4, sorry.
Group 4. You're in group
I was
4.
just going to say, I didn't recognise that.
You're in group 4, the secure group. No.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to just say a couple of words. First of all, just worth noting that we were not all made redundant. So I think just to put a bit of context on that, out of the 4 of us, at least 2 weren't. But nonetheless, I think what I noticed, and please feel free others to speak, is that there was a bit of a diversity of feelings, actually. from anger to disappointment to sadness to disbelief. What was very common, and I'm not sure if this quite answers the question, but I think it's worth mentioning, is that some time out was needed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing around time, I think, was really important, both short term, i.e. immediately, but also there's a few of us that mentioned that it's taken and is still taking some time to process and to come to terms with. So I think that's just worthwhile putting together, just in terms of the diversity of feelings, but also the concept of time.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. That's also some extremely good points there. That time. That phrase, "time heals all." Yes, it does. However, we have to be open to that healing and to taking that time to understanding. So, some wonderful comments. Thank you very much. Would anybody from the other groups like to share? Okay. Mary, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. So if we go back to this idea of the change curve, let me just pull that up on the screen again. Let me just go back one. When we go back to this, your comments, the comments that have come from Alex and Alan, if I remember correctly, you've identified this change curve and the washing machine of emotions that goes on at the beginning, of shock, disbelief, anger, sadness, and many other emotions that go on, and you're almost like you're in a washing machine cycle that doesn't stop. And then this idea of, with time, things begin to get a bit clearer. The spin cycle slows down and we begin to see things a little bit clearer and understanding, okay, this is not the ideal place to spend our time, whether it is a redundancy or it's some other situation. So, very good. Anybody like to add anything else to this exercise or to where we are now? I'll just move you off the screen. Okay, so I want to come back to this idea of the heart and this connection in the right and left brain thinking. So left brain is all about logic. Right brain is all about the emotion. But it's also about creativity. And when we connect not only to our brain, but to our heart, we broaden this picture. But very often, this picture, when we connect to the heart, becomes the reality of where we are and what we want, which is also a very important point. And if we apply what I'm saying now to this idea, both Shackleton, the explorer, and myself in this situation that I found myself in Russia, I had a team of 15 people all looking at me. And I knew that they would not have any income whatsoever if I made them redundant. Not even the Russian approach of earning money on the black market, doing something, because the economy was collapsing, and it was collapsing very fast. And in my heart, I wanted them to survive. I wanted us to survive, and I wanted us to come through this this situation as one team, so that we could come out the other end and be stronger for it, but at the same time carry on doing what we were doing well, which was providing training services to everybody. And this heart, if I'd used my head only, left brain, I would have got on the next plane. I would have packed my stuff. I'd have said, fantastic. I've had a very good 5 years in Russia. Loved every minute of it. Well, not quite, but most of it. And got on the next plane. But I sat down and I listened to my heart. What's my heart saying? Even though I knew that the mountain decline was going to be enormous. And I followed my heart. And the good thing about following my heart was it was correct. Because at the end of that year, just over a year, I ended up with a $50,000 contract to provide training, it was like somebody put the lifeline out. Well, where did this come from? I literally was about to get on that plane after struggling for a year. And there it was. Like, wow, okay, here we are. And we went then from strength to strength. So in these situations that are challenging, that are overwhelming, it's not only about the logic of the decision making or the logic of what to do, how to do. It's about your heart and going inside yourself, allowing that time for yourself to understand, what do you want? Do you want just another job if you've been made redundant, or do you want a specific type of job? Do you want to stay where you're living, or do you want to go somewhere else? What's your heart saying? Okay, so thinking about that idea, let's think about this impact of listening and not listening to your body, to your heart, and to what's going on with you. Very often when we find ourselves in situations that are overwhelming, that are extremely difficult, we close down our listening and we don't want to hear. We don't want to hear what's going on. And we override that, or we simply close down and we just put our blinkers on, put our earplugs in, and don't see and don't listen. But the question is, what is the impact of not listening on the mind and the body? And it is usually the body. Well, no, it's not usually the body, but very often the body gives the first inclination that you're pushing too hard, or you're pulling too much, or you're in the ground, or you're on close on burnout. All these issues, the body tells you long before you have the collapse. And if I'd known this, if I'd listened to my body, I would have taken the foot off the accelerator. Why do I say that? Because directly after we came through this economic crisis and I picked up this $50,000 contract in one go, my body collapsed, literally. And I ended up lying on the apartment floor of a friend of mine in London, flat on my back, in severe pain for 3 months. Oh. And of course, when you're looking up at the ceiling, you're thinking, oh, why me? Why am I here? And that's enough time to start to process. What have I been through, and what have I not heard? And why have I not heard it? So, Chris, can we do the second poll, please? Which is around who pushes through and does not listen to the body when feeling tired, overwhelmed. Yeah, so here's the second poll for you. So who pushes through? Who have you pushed through? And this is a question to you. And don't listen to your body when feeling tired, overwhelmed. Perhaps you've got an increase in regularity of headaches. Perhaps you've got back strain. Perhaps you're getting sciatica. All these things that occur because we're pushing too hard. Yes, that's me. No, that's not me. Where are we going here? Oh, good. Is that everybody? Yeah?
Yeah, I think that is.
Brilliant. Oh.
There we go. There we go.
Okay.
Share the results. There you go.
Okay. I mean, it's great to see, no, that's not me. That's more than, yes, that's me. That's really fantastic to see that. So keep in mind that your body is like, it's like a traffic light. When it goes on to amber, you need to pay attention because it's trying to slow you down before it goes on to red, which means emergency. In my case, it was an emergency. I flew out of Russia in a horizontal position. Okay, good. So thank you for that. All right, let's go on. For some reason, it's not. Oh, there it is. Now it's gone away. Okay, let's go on to looking at our sphere of influence, our sphere of influence, or our circle of influence and control. The reason I want you to look at this is because very often we try and control things that we have no control over. And this means that actually we're using precious energy that we could apply to area of our circle of influence and control that we can influence and control. So if we go from the external circle inwards, this is just an example of what we could put in the external. So we each are going to have our own circle of influence and control. Some areas will be the same, for example, family, our mood, the words we choose, etc. But some things won't be the same. So, for example, in my external sphere there, in the situation in Russia, I had no control over the economy. I had no control over the government of Russia. I had no control on what was happening in the marketplace with other people being made redundant. So there was no point in me spending any time on that because it was just going to use energy that I needed somewhere else. Moving into the inner circle of influence, the next circle after that, of the circle of influence, there are things that I can influence, but I cannot control. So I could influence relationships. For example, every time I went out, we'd go around to a friend's house or something and have dinner together or something. The topic of conversation was always this economic crisis. How are you doing? Have you made everybody redundant? And I got to the point where I couldn't cope with it and I stopped going out because it just depressed me. So it kept me in this low aspect of the Kubler-Ross curve. It didn't pick my mood up. It continued to sort of squash it and stop me coming up the curve. So actually I stopped going to people who could only talk about that. And I only spent my time in relationships that would pick me up, would give me energy, and me them energy also. I could influence to a certain degree how my team behaved and how they helped me and themselves to be successful and come out or through this crisis. Yeah, so there are things like mood and positivity. I could influence that with my team because I said every day we're going to sit and have lunch together. Those people that were working on those days, and they didn't all work every day, I said, we have lunch together, and I always cook something. It might have been pasta salad or soup and something nice bread or something like that. And we would sit for an hour and we would just discuss, enjoy, joke. So I could influence the mood of my team, but I couldn't necessarily control it. Moving into the inner circle of control, those are the things that you can directly change about yourself and control about yourself. So, for example, the words you use about yourself. Do you speak positively to yourself, or do you call yourself in derogatory terms like stupid? Why are you so unintelligent? Things like this, which are very destructive to our mood, to our physical well-being as well. I could influence how I pitch up every day. I can control what I decide to wear. Do I put makeup on? Do I wash my hair? And every day I influenced that, and I made sure that I felt good in what I was wearing. I made an effort. Of course, I could choose the food that I eat. I can do that anytime. Yeah, I can choose how I stand, how I sit, where I stand and sit, my mood, the tone of voice that I use with other people and with myself, my own output. Make that change one way or another with my own control mechanism, and whether I exercise and my thoughts. Okay, so anybody got any questions on that? All right, so very quickly, what I'd like each of you to do is just draw your own circle of influence and control that exists right now in the situation you find yourself. It might be redundancy. It might be facing divorce. It might be, I don't know, a cut in salary. It might be some financial situation. Just draw your own circle of influence and control and put in the things that you have no control over, the things that you can influence, and the things that you can directly control. All right, so I'll give you 5 minutes to do that.
Excuse me, Rachel, can I ask a question on this?
Sure.
So these are the things which can be referenced. Is like a referencing points, or is this things which you have in this at this moment in your life?
In relation to the situation that you're addressing?
Circle of influence circle, which you mentioned, like a relationship, family, close surroundings, voting, mood, or neighborhood kind of thing, right? So what happens if you're not circulated with those at all, and if you're surrounded with something else?
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, all these things that are listed in this particular example of influence and control, circle of influence and control, will change according to the situation you face. They're not something that is concrete for everything. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Fantastic. So this exercise is very useful to do when you're faced with something that's overwhelming, because it helps you to identify where to put your energy. In other words, what you can influence and control, rather than worrying about all the rest that you have no control over. Let it go, let it be, let it flow. So we could apply this to COVID-19, and all the governmental rules and regulations, lockdown, no lockdown, PCR tests, no PCR tests, masks, no masks. You can't influence any of that. Forget it. Let the government do what the government does. I'm not saying disregard what they're saying, but don't worry about it, because they're going to control it anyway. So only work with what you can influence and what is within your circle of control. Yeah? Okay, so would somebody like to share a couple of things that you have in your circle of influence that you have control over, don't have control over, that you can influence? Anybody like to share?
No one.
Nobody wants to share? Okay, no worries. That's okay. People don't want to share. That's okay too. I've just lost everybody. Right. Okay. All right. So while you were finishing off there, as I say, it's really important to understand when you see this, and it takes 5 minutes to do, you realize, what am I wasting my time on that for? Because you can't do anything about it. And therefore, don't waste your time. But most importantly, don't waste your energy, both physical and emotional. So, what drains energy? Let's have a look. Idea. Thinking about energy, which we'll have, if you think about it as a bank account. When you're born, you get a full bank account of energy in most cases. And that bank account can be kept topped up, or it can get drained. And this means that we need to be aware of what will feed the bank account positively, so it stays on a set amount. It may even increase, but it doesn't decrease. So let's look at what drains energy and what feeds energy. So just to concentrate on this red side here of what drains energy. So negative emotions, and I mentioned this at the very beginning, the 5 key negative emotions that register in the body as a physical disease at some point, if practiced for a long time, are those 5. Fear, which is why the COVID-19 actually situation is pretty desperate, because the fear that has been generated by our global governments, experts, whoever they are, around this disease is potentially going to do more damage than the actual disease itself, which less than 1% of the population die from. Anger, which I think we're also in people around COVID, is anger at being locked down, at being controlled, at being freedoms taken away, even though there is an understanding why it's important. Shame is a massive one. Shame for all kinds of things that perhaps we've done or we didn't do the way we wanted to, or we said. Guilt and blame. And these 5 emotions are critical to manage so they don't drain your energy. And more importantly, they don't end up registered on the body as diseases, dis-ease. So the opposite to these obviously are positive emotions. Laughter, compassion for yourself. Start with yourself first, understanding, okay, I screwed up there. I could have done better. Right, this is what I've learned from it. And then letting it go and moving on. Unconditional love for yourself. Irrelevant, just like a parent would do for a child who's been naughty. However naughty they've been, you still love them. Yeah, unconditional love. And of course, gratitude. Giving gratitude for what we have, however small that gratitude may be, is massive for evening out these emotions that drain energy. Okay, negative people. I gave an example in a bit earlier about negative people. I stopped seeing negative people during that time because it was draining my energy. I can't deal with this. I'm out of here. And I only found people who are positive, to support me support them, so that you build, you don't drain. Toxic environments, of course, are draining of energy, whatever they are. Is this a family environment? Is it a work environment? Is it some other toxic form of environment which is not supportive, not fun, and therefore drains energy? Inability to say no. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this because of the fact we don't have it. But when you take on more than you can manage and you realize you should have said no, or you wanted to say no, but you couldn't because you feel guilty for saying no, you then create your own tension, your own anxiety, your own overwhelm. And that means that you drain your energy. So being more assertive to actually say to somebody, well, I'm really sorry, I can't do that at this time, is better for you. What they do with it is their issue, but it's better for you to say that openly and straight up. Procrastination, putting things off, of course, drains energy because it doesn't go away. It stays there, which basically means you're not doing anything about it. You're pretending it's not there. You're not listening. You're not seeing. Stress, overwhelm, and chaos. Of course, we can manage those things by creating a task list, creating a step-by-step process instead of trying to eat the elephant all at once. Yeah, eat the elephant in pieces. Lack of time for yourself. This is so important. And this point that Alex made about taking time out. It's so important. What you do with it doesn't matter. It's just your time, your space to just be. Whether you sit under a tree, you sit on your sofa, you, I don't know, sew, you knit, you garden, it doesn't matter. It's so important to make sure you have that time for yourself on a regular basis. And ideally, at least 10 to 15 minutes a day. Teamwork, being let down by others, of course, is very disappointing, whether it's friends, colleagues, family, but you have to let it go. Poor nutrient diet, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, together with healthy foods. Yo-yo dieting. Anybody in the group that yo-yo diets? Yeah, on the diet, off the diet, on the diet, off the diet. This is incredibly destructive of your body, and it won't work. So there are other ways to go about losing weight if that's one of the things you want to do. Skipping meals and then snacking, again, very destructive and very stressful to the physical body. It's much better to do intermittent fasting, where you don't eat for perhaps 12 hours, maybe 14 hours, 16 hours, and then you eat within the balance of the 24-hour period. Hi, Srikanth, you wanted to say something?
I just want to ask you about the negative people. You mentioned it's like a draining energy, but if you put into context of like the feedback, if you avoid that kind of feedback and take a decision, would that be still a concrete decision for your solution?
I'm sorry, I didn't pick up which point are you questioning?
Positive people or negative people?
Oh yeah. So we can't always not be with negative people. Sometimes they might be our boss, or I don't know, the obvious one is the mother-in-law, which we shouldn't blame the mother-in-law. So you would limit your time and you would work with it in the best. But to generally surround yourself with majority positive people. Does that answer the question?
Srikanth? Slightly, but I'm trying to understand why it is drains energy, because negative people is not like they intentionally negative, because they're trying to give you something which you doesn't like it. So that means like they're trying to give you some feedback from their own perspective. So why don't take it as and don't apply, because it's still a feedback, and you don't need to cut out those people in your life from time to time, right?
Understood. Two different things. So the kind of people that I'm talking about are those people that are negative generally. Oh, they're people that the glass is half empty, that, you know, nothing's ever good enough. They never have enough. That person did it wrong. Those people are all wrong. This is wrong. These are not people that are providing you feedback. Feedback is different, and it's very constructive and positive. And yes, it's important to allow, if people are going to offer that feedback to you, to listen and understand, do I accept that? Do I reject that? Do I part accept it, part reject it? So there's a difference in the two situations, and what you're saying, I totally support. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so dehydration is one of the things also that affects our mood greatly and our performance and our, so make sure you drink plenty of water and or herbal teas throughout the day, and you should be aiming for a minimum of 1.5 litres of water a day. And working with SMART goals, deciding what it is you want to achieve and identifying that in a goal. So to just take a few of these aspects out and just look at them in a little bit more detail in the last sort of 25 minutes of our time together. People and relationships. We all need people and we all need relationships, whether that's family members, friends, in work, with colleagues, and so on. And they can be as building as they can be destroying. And I like very much, Shrikant, your question, because it's really important to differentiate between getting constructive feedback and getting negative, destructive, which is not helpful. It drains your energy. So thinking about people and relations, be as assertive as you can when needed. So don't be afraid to say no. Don't let people ride roughshod over you. Stand up for who you are and have the confidence in yourself to be yourself. And if somebody doesn't like that, to be quite honest with you, that's their problem. But it's not about being mean or disrespectful of somebody else. It's simply about being confident in who you are. Think about working in groups, in teams, as opposed to on your own. So co-create with others. And I must say, one of the most beautiful things that's come out of this COVID-19 is, for me anyway, is co-creating with other trainers, other professionals. It's very motivating. It keeps you active, but at the same time, it also produces some wonderful things. And this idea of more than one brain, looking at an issue, looking at a problem, is more helpful to the situation due to the differences in perspectives. Think about managing your own emotions, and when somebody's inappropriately expressing emotions on you, be assertive to say, I understand how you feel. However, please don't take it out on me. Yeah. And allowing that distance. Okay? And don't be afraid to address any conflict. So don't allow conflict to fester. This is also very draining on energy, and it takes up a lot of time. So rather deal with it, bring it out in the open, discuss it openly, and move on. Okay, so when looking at work practices, or if you're not in work, creating a regular routine, just as Shackleton did, and just as I did for my team. Think about your own natural biorhythm. So what I mean by biorhythm is, where do you have most energy in the day? Most people, but not all, because this can also be cultural. When you wake, your energy starts to climb till about mid-morning, and then it drops off a little bit. You have something to eat, and it'll go up for a short time and then drop down and then climb a little bit before sort of early evening or into early evening. Use your natural energy pattern to do the tasks that are most difficult. So if there's a call you've been putting off, do it at that time where you're most energetic. If there's some conflict you want to deal with it in your energetic time. Part of the elephant that you've been procrastinating about, put it into that energetic time, because that's when it's easier to do, less overwhelm, less energy drain. Prioritize effectively and make sure you know where you're going. Make your goals SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-framed. So that you understand what it is you want to achieve and you can measure it, and you have a date, a closing date for that. That means you've got something to work towards. Think about your attitude. Attitude is a massive drain on energy. Is your glass half full or half empty? Yeah, think positively about things. I know it's difficult sometimes, but this idea of silver lining, there's always a silver lining. Sometimes we don't see it at the time. We have to go through it before we actually see what the positive aspect was. And the positive aspect for me going through that situation in Russia has given me a level of resilience that is just unbelievable. At the time, I didn't see it. Now I see it really clearly. Speak positively about yourself and speak positively to others. Positivity attracts positivity. Negativity attracts negativity. And be willing to adapt and change. Recognize the emotions you feel. Acknowledge them. Work with them. Oops, nearly tipped my computer up. Work with them and move through that change curve with the Kubler-Ross message there. And the last point that I want to just talk briefly about is this relation to nutrition and hydration. This is absolutely massive to your energy, not only the physical, but also the mental. We now know from research that there is a direct link between the gut and the brain. And both the gut and the brain has a microbiome. Microbiome is this flora, gut flora or brain flora of good and bad bacteria. When your gut is not healthy, you end up with bad bacteria, more bad bacteria, and this causes issues on the physical level. Things like cramping, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, reflux, lots of other things. But more importantly than that is that it affects your ability with your mental health to be positive, to think logically, to manage emotions, because it causes brain fog, it causes lack of focus, it causes lack of energy, where you struggle to do stuff. So think really carefully about what you eat and how you eat, because this is so critical. And I'm not only talking about eating organic foods. Not all of us can afford organic, but we can eat healthily without having to spend a great deal of money. And what I mean by healthily is think about adequate protein intake. If you eat animal protein, then you're looking at a good quality meat of some kind, or fish or eggs. If you're vegan or vegetarian, then you can get your proteins from beans and from some vegetables. Think about the variety that you eat. Make sure you have variety. And cheaper is to eat seasonally. It's also better for you because the things are at the time they should be eaten. We should eat root vegetables in the winter. That's when into nature to be eaten. Same with berries. We eat berries in the summer because they come out in the summer. This is when you get maximum nutrition, and the foods are cheaper generally. Think about the volume of stress you put on yourself for all the reasons that we looked at in that chart of draining energy, and try and manage that through your circle of influence, because stress affects the gut microbiome. And this is such a big one. It destroys good bacteria, basically. Think about fear. Is there that is causing you fear? Address it. Look at your circle of influence through addressing it, and address it step by step by looking at it through that circle of influence. Make sure that you get outside every day and work with nature. Nature is such a powerful influence on our mood, on our health. Just being out with greenery is calming and very helpful. Even if it's 10 minutes, just do it, breathe, relax, take in the noises, the sounds, the breeze, the leaves, the perfumes, etc. Drugs, I'm not going to say too much about, but they do affect the gut microbiome. They also stress the liver, and therefore taking care of yourself to limit impact on the liver, which stress also has an effect on, is really important to help you detox effectively so that your brain and your body is fit and well. Okay, we don't have time for the last exercise, but think about this in relation to yourself and take some time for yourself, if you can, after this session, just to think about your work practices or your day-to-day practices in relation to your natural biorhythm. Use the energetic times to do the things where you need most brain power. Think about what you eat and how you eat it. Do you eat on the run, or do you sit down and really be mindful about what you eat? Do you give gratitude for what's on your plate? Think about the relationships in your life. Are there some that you need to address and deal with, build? Is there some conflict you need to get rid of to allow you to be more free? And think about your attitude. Do you need to change your attitude in terms of the change that you need to face, in terms of conflict, in terms of work, in terms of, I don't know, where you're going in your life, all kinds of things. Just think about that for yourself after this session. So in conclusion, in order to support yourself positively, you've got to look at the different dimensions of your life, your lifestyle as a whole, exercise, movement, your diet, and how you perceive life. So make time for yourself with good quality sleep, drink plenty of water, look at the foods you eat, make sure they're nutrient rich, not fast foods, cook from scratch, all these good things. Get out regularly, move regularly so that you're detoxing all the toxins that are in our air, in our water, and everywhere else. Mobile devices, take some downtime from that. That's really good because they are also stressful. Electromagnetic radiation has an impact. Switch off your Wi-Fi at night if you can. Speak in the positive, flow, and breathe. But most importantly, be you and love yourself. This is so important to managing who you are and managing your mental and your physical health. So that's about it. Does anybody have any questions?
Rachel, I think it's not about the question, but I'm trying to find more details of like when in your life, the Russia incident is really like a stepping stone for you, right? When you're on that situation, like how long that the situation lasts for? At the same time, how depth the situation is, like you are on the broke stage within days or within months. At the same time, how did you deal in a day-to-day life, like daily? Like, did you change any habits? Did you change? Did you take any further steps in order to compensate that kind of stress? How did you went through in that stage? I just want to understand it.
Fantastic questions, Shrikant. Thank you. So the element of working with my team was so important for me. And this point about having lunch together was a point about managing my moods and finding some joy in my life and time to laugh. So that was extremely helpful. I made sure that I got outside every single day. Sometimes I would walk to the office, which was a good 45-minute walk. Sometimes I would walk from the office, leave my car there, and then walk the next day. So the exercise was also critical for me. And it's always been critical for me because if I don't exercise, I get very angry with myself because I feel much better when I exercise, as actually most people do. And it doesn't have to be a very strenuous form of exercise. It can be just walking, it can be swimming, tennis, football, whatever you like to do. Gardening is another one. I also spent time actually, Sunday was my day. I allocated Sunday as my day, and it was a blobbing day, actually. Yes, I would go outside, but I also would spend Sunday afternoon just on my sofa, reading a book, falling asleep if I felt like it. And to a certain extent, I still do that. When I've had a very stressful week, I still take Sundays. I also cooked for myself in a different way on a Sunday. So I really would have some food which was nourishing, that I felt was nourishing, that I wanted to have at that time. And invariably it would be something around, I don't know, some kind of stew or baked potato with stew or something of this nature. I also chose my friends very carefully at that time. I mean, that sounds awful, but I understood truly at that time who really were my friends. And that meant I spent more time with those people because we were giving and taking from each other in balance. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but also I'm trying to figure it out, like because you're stressed morely on the financial side, not on a health or a social oriented side. So how did you deal with that? And what are the things you took? Steps you taken over?
For the health side?
No, business, financial side. I'm trying to.
To be quite honest with you, looking at it, What I did was I put certain things in place for each of my team members. And the basic rule was you work 3 days a week for this salary. When you come in the office, you are positive. If you're coming in the office and you're going to moan and groan, I don't want you here. So you need to be positive, and you need to do something that is useful during that time. And we did all kinds of things. We cleaned the CRM. We did research into companies that potentially might generate business. We cleaned up the filing system. We looked at new products that we could develop. We did a lot of new product development at that time, which at the time didn't bring money, but later on actually did bring money, because when the economic crisis lifted, when it changed, we were ready. We were totally ready. So we were off the starting point much faster than any other company. And therefore, we're in position to support our clients much faster. We also called our clients very regularly. Not to say, have you got some business? Because we understood they didn't. But we called to say, how are you? We're just calling to say hello and how are you? And people really valued that. And that also put us in a very strong position for when things lifted, because we were the first people that they remembered. Does that answer the question, Srikanth?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other questions?
I think we are right at the top of the hour there, Rachel.
Yep.
Thank you very much indeed for your sharing today and giving us this pulse of wisdom. How do we, ride that Kubler-Ross change curve, or if we have already overcome that, then how to take care of ourselves with respect to the diet, the microbiome, and everything else. These are really some interesting slides there, and definitely something that all of us, whether we were made redundant or not, can use. Again, before we all leave, I would really urge you guys to just click on that link in the chat session. It'll give us a great amount of feedback for the speaker as well as for the events team, so that we can improve our offering, when it comes to different webinars. It just takes less than a minute. It's just 3 or 4 questions, if I remember well. So once again, if you guys would like to save the chat, just go to chat. There's 3 dots there. You can save the chat for any LinkedIn profiles that you would like to, click on later. And if you have any questions, then Rachel, can you put back the slide where you have your details, then they can connect with you and then ask you any questions.
Sure.
And please take a screenshot of that slide if you would like to contact Rachel.